Great. So thank you everyone for joining us for raising LGBTQIA plus kids and fostering resilience. My name is Kara Schwartz, and from Be a Part of the Conversation, I'm our communications manager here. And our executive director, Kim Porter, is also with us tonight, so you will hear from her as well. Before we get started, I just want to thank our community partner, Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services, for funding this really important program. A few notes: the program is being recorded, but at the end when we have our Q&A session, your names and any questions you ask will remain private, so that will not be part of the recording. And you can submit questions using the chat box or the Q&A box throughout the presentation, and the panelists, especially Kim and myself, will be monitoring those questions, and your anonymity will be preserved there as well. And not last, but also not least, please take our survey at the end of this program. So it'll pop up right when the webinar is over, and it will also be put in the chat throughout and be on our follow-up page. Speaking of that, when this program is over, we have some awesome panelists here with a lot of resources, and you can find those resources as well as the slides that we're going to share at conversation.zone/LGBT. So if you have any questions about that, please don't hesitate to chat, email, reach out. And then I'm going to have Kim just talk briefly about our parent partnership program.
Thanks, Kara. Hi, everyone. So parent partnership is very near and dear to my heart. This is a place for parents like me to come together. I have a son in recovery from substance use disorder. We meet throughout the region. You can find that website is in the link is in that chat that I just shared with you, conversation.zone/partnership. Next slide, Kara. So you can see from this calendar that we have meetings taking place throughout the area, both on Zoom and in person. When you visit that page, just scroll down to that calendar, click on any of those little boxes that you see, and you'll get the details about those meetings. So lots of really great resources there for families who love someone with a substance use disorder. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah. And if you're looking for more content, we do have a YouTube page that is full of previously recorded webinars, in-person events as well. And that's convo.zone/YouTube. So without further ado, just to get into our content for tonight, we have some amazing panelists that I'm going to briefly introduce you to, and then I'm going to provide a bit of foundational overview and concepts for tonight, and then you'll hear from them. So first we have Lee Cray, and she is the director of LGBTQIA programming at Charlie Health. Dr. Cray is a trauma-informed yoga instructor as well, and a certified philosophical consultant, mindfulness coach, and sexuality counselor. They regularly offer classes such as trans yoga and queer mindfulness for members of the LGBTQIA plus community. We also have Kate Roberts, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist who works with this queer community as well, and views the process of self-exploration from a queer affirmative lens, grounded in radical empowerment. She also specializes in substance use issues, young adult men issues, survivors of trauma and oppression, and those struggling with sadness, depression, and anxiety. And we have Dr. Joe Charette, and he is a professor in clinical counseling. In addition to his work, he works in private counseling practice with members of the queer and trans communities, as well as trauma survivors. He also provides consultation to community agencies and schools about affirmative and celebratory practices for working with queer and trans clients. His scholarly interests include queer and trans identity development and management, intersectionality of identity development and matching and counseling supervision, and sexual health, prevention, and wellness across the lifespan. So we are so thankful and happy to have all three of you here with us tonight. So like I said, these slides will be available after the presentation, so I'm not going to spend too much time on acronyms, abbreviations, and terminology. But let's just take a quick moment to review kind of what does LGBTQ2IA+ mean. You might also hear myself or others refer to gender expansive, queer communities, and you could hear gender fluid, gender non-binary, gender queer, variety of gender identities. You also might hear a variety of sexual orientations or affectional orientations, such as aromantic, pansexual, demisexual, more. The important thing is these lists are usually not all encompassing, and the best source of information about this community is to gather your own resources, come to programs like this, and if your loved one is comfortable, ask them and be gracious when, corrected or taught something new. We're all learning here, and that's why we're here today. So these are also some definitions that you can take a look at about sexual orientation and gender identity. I am personally a visual person, so you might look at it like this. So some people say that gender, is boy or girl, that binary. Others look at it as the spectrum, kind of with stuff in between. But the reality is that gender identity kind of looks like this. So it describes our internal understanding and experience of our own gender. Every person is unique. Every experience with their gender identity and expression is unique. And there are thousands and thousands of ways that people experience gender. And this is great. This is from the Trevor Project. And same thing with sexuality. So some people say it looks like this. Others say that sexual orientation is that. But in reality, it includes different forms of attraction, behaviors, and identity. And for a long time, people saw forms of attraction as the same thing. But as our language has expanded, more and more people have come to understand that different forms of attraction can be parsed out and talked about as distinct categories. So you often hear, sexual, physical, romantic, and emotional attraction, how people differentiate their affectional or sexual orientation. But just to note that there are always more, and you can always be learning. So when we think about this gender identity, sexual orientation, sexual identity, and then kind of try to put it into our gender norms, which might kind of seem old school, but they're still incredibly prevalent. And sometimes they can seem harmless, but really they're impactful in identity development in our children, in our youth, and as adults. And so all of this kind of plays in what we're here to talk tonight about, which is being LGBTQIA, raising LGBTQIA children, and protecting them and promoting resilience and support. So being in this community is not itself a risk factor for substance use and addiction, but experiencing the stigma, the shaming language, homophobia, judgmental attitudes, and emotional or physical abuse are risky social conditions which contribute to this minority stress. So it's not the person, but it's everything that's happening around them, and create challenges for this population. And because of this, you can take a look at this. Our adolescents are more likely to binge drink, use cannabis, engage in IV drug use, use cocaine than their non-LGBTQ2IA plus peers. So although it is not on them, it is on the society around them, it's still really important that we're looking at this, especially as educators, parents, and caregivers. Also, the CDC collects data on these 15 to 17-year-olds who say they identify as non-heterosexual. And as we can see, there's been an increase, which is indicating, good thing for social change, but there are still the challenges that we talked about. And then really importantly, if we look at this, these bars, so this is Americans who self-identified as LGBTQ in 2021 by generation. And as you see, you have the age breakdown here as well. And what Kim and I were talking about earlier is that if you look at Gen X, which is 4.2% self-identified as LGBTQ, and then you look at Gen Z, and that's 20.8. These Gen Xers are most likely the parents of these Gen Z individuals. So that right there is a generation gap. There's a lack of understanding and awareness simply because not as many people were identifying as LGBTQ. So there is a need as caregivers and parents that we understand and are able to support the children in our lives. And then here is just another graph to illustrate that. Gen Zers are more likely to know someone's using general gender neutral pronouns, more likely to say forms should offer gender options, as you can see here. So just to kind of start us off with some of that information, and now I am more than happy to pass it off to Dr. Cray.
Thank you so much, Kara. And thank you to the other panelists for being here. Thanks to Kim, and thanks for everyone who showed up to learn. Showing up for yourselves, your communities, your kiddos, whoever it is you're showing up for. So I love that introduction, Kara. I'm going to call back to several points of it because there were a number of things that were really, really striking in there, and I think really cry out for explanation. Right? Some things that might raise some eyebrows and maybe even be a little alarming, but if we contextualize in the right way, they start to make perfect sense and even become predictable. Right? So I already got that wonderful biography offered. I'll fill it in a little bit. So again, my name is Lee. I know it looks like it's pronounced Lay. It's not. You can call me Lay, but that would be incorrect. It's Lee. I just spell it wrong. But I think the pronunciation is up to me. It's actually the second half of my given name, which is Wesley, which is a girl's name. Why is it a girl's name? Because I'm a girl and it's my name. So there you go, right? End of story. My pronouns are she and they. And what I usually like to say is that she is right and they isn't wrong. But I've recently adopted an extended version of that from one of the clients I work with. She is right, they isn't wrong. And if you call me he, you're a coward. Because it's the easy way out, right? Wonderful client. So yeah, I'm the director of LGBTQIA+ programming at Charlie Health, where I oversee all things related to this collection of communities for what is the largest intensive outpatient program, fully virtual intensive outpatient program in the country, serving young adults and adolescents between 11 to about 28, give or take a little bit on either end. Keeps me pretty busy, but it's a good kind of busy, right? I go to sleep at night very tired, but it's the best kind of tired I've ever had. I live in Texas for now. It's a scary space for me, honestly. There's a lot going on in Texas. I don't know if any of y'all saw that viral preacher recently calling for violence against the LGBTQIA+ community, but that's my neighborhood. So when I walk through the grocery store, I wonder, are you one of the people who was cheering in that video? Right? That's why I'm leaving Texas in about 5 weeks. But I want to rewind and I want to share a little bit more of my story and my growth and my journey through acceptance of identity and my journey through recovery that kind of got me from where I started to where I am now, and then share some of the lessons I've learned along the way. So where did I start? Well, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, right in the middle, in a little town called Middleburg. Went to Middleburg Elementary School. It was okay. I have some fond memories. For a young, kind of eccentric, gender non-conforming child who would later discover that she is an autistic, asexual, transgender woman, but didn't have that vocabulary at the time, I didn't really have a way to express my struggles. And I was the target of a lot of aggression from my peers, which might be why I've developed a pretty big personality as a result, as a way of taking up space that was not really granted to me when I was a child, right? It's why I love this acronym, LGBTQIA+. I love how many letters and how many syllables. Some people are like, it's clunky. And I'm like, no, say the whole thing, take up the space. This is a subtle form of us claiming the space that's been denied to us for so long, right? But I grew up, I was very, very eccentric kiddo, right? I spent my time playing video games, designing video games, playing Dungeons and Dragons, inventing my own religions, all of this sort of stuff, normal teenage stuff. I spent some time as a child, went off to college. That was kind of boring. Moved to Ohio, got a PhD in philosophy, eventually, ended up in Texas. where I became assistant professor of philosophy, women and gender studies, and contemplative studies at Texas Christian University. Or as the folks from Baylor like to call it, technically Christian University. That's the joke. But I left out some steps there. I had experienced some pretty severe discomfort my whole life. Right? And I was not really in a position to diagnose or even understand that discomfort because, again, I just didn't have the vocabulary for it. But the way I would explain it now in retrospect is it always seemed to me like my shoes were on the wrong feet. You know, like there's something uncomfortable. I couldn't put my finger on it. And no one ever told me my shoes were on the wrong feet. In fact, from birth, I was told to put them on the way I was wearing them. Right. But it was not right. I saw other people moving through the world with ease, but for me, it was really uncomfortable. And sometimes it felt like there were stones or pebbles or even shards of glass in those shoes, you know, but I just didn't know what it was because it never dawned on me to switch the shoes. No, I never had that idea. But I spent a lot of time basically cosplaying as a cisgender straight man, right? Just wearing this awkward, ill-fitting boy suit, wandering around my day-to-day, trying to be in relationships with pretty girls so that I could feel good about myself. Because if I could get a pretty girl to like me, that would mean I was valid, right? I needed that. When I moved from Pennsylvania to Ohio to start graduate school, I moved away from a partner. And when I started graduate school, I was heartbroken. I was living in a big city for the first time in my life, Columbus, Ohio. Oof. And I was overwhelmed. Grad school was hard. I was lonely. So I discovered my new best friend, which was alcohol, right? I went to Larry's, which was a bar on High Street. And someone ordered me a pint of Guinness. And I was like, cool, I'm gonna drink that. I'm gonna be a big kid now. And yeah, it became a habit. It became a crutch. And to be honest, I don't remember much of my lived experience throughout grad school because that was an everyday phenomenon for me. I was in the Midwest, so it was craft beer, Yingling. I remember when we got that in Columbus, and then Scotch, and then in the evening, White Castle. That was my routine. I was not the healthiest person. All right. I managed to do really well in graduate school, but I was dealing with this discomfort that I could not put my finger on and medicating with alcohol, right, regularly. Whew. I eventually moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, right, where I got my first academic job out of grad school at Grand Valley State University. And it was right around then that one of my friends came out as non-binary on Facebook. And at first, when I first read the post, I was like, oh yeah, that's me. And then I looked up what the word meant. You know, that's the order of events. I saw it and I was like, that, whatever that means, that's me. I just kind of knew it, right? This friend of mine went on to become an amazing scholar of gender theory at Yale and actually wrote an amicus brief last year that swayed the Supreme Court in a landmark LGBTQIA plus rights decision. I'm pretty proud of them. But one night, I didn't tell anyone about my identity because I didn't want to be some white guy who was appropriating queer identity and invading spaces that weren't mine, you know? So one night I was out at a bar in Michigan. It was very late, very, very late. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who was a scholar of feminist thought. And I was like, hey, how do you know? How do you know if you're trans? Like, what if you're wrong? And oh, she got really mad at me because she thought I was questioning the validity of other people's judgments of their identities. She didn't realize I was coming out to her. Right? And it turned into a shouting match. And the next day she sent me all these articles about privilege. And I was like, yeah, I know, I teach those articles too. I was trying to get some guidance, but I went way deep into the closet, right? Way, way deep because I tried to come out and it did not go well. So it took me a bunch of years before I was ready again. So fast forward, I'm living in Texas, got a job at Texas Christian University, right? And I start dating this person, and there's this amazing connection, but we have no idea how to make it work because there's something that's not falling into place. We're both very uncomfortable. And we break up, and I'm like, I'm going to collapse. So I decided I wasn't going to collapse. I was going to walk to the end of my street, go to the yoga studio there, get back into yoga, and pick myself up. And it was 1 year to the day after that breakup that I finished my yoga teacher training at the same studio. Through that yoga teacher training, I found sobriety. I am at 1,131 days as of today. And through that sobriety, the clarity that came with that, perfectly timed during the yoga training, that I finally said to myself, yeah, I'm trans, right? A non-binary trans woman, if I want to utter the full phrase, right? But immediately it was like those shoes were on the right feet. And I was like, oh, that's what it's been this whole time, right? I got to take them off, shake out the shards of glass, put them on the right feet. And I was like, oh, this feels great. This feels so much better. This is who I am. And I had that clarity. I didn't have the mind fog of constantly being in a perpetually hungover state, right? Which was great. And some people will say that, being trans radicalizes you. And that happened to me. I was like, oh, I can help people. I'm going to do it. So I started teaching trans yoga, right? I was getting increasingly dissatisfied with working in academia. And I said to my therapist, I want to work with LGBTQI plus kids. And I kid you not, the next day, I got a call from a friend of mine who's like, hey, I'm working for this new startup, this new telehealth company, Charlie Health. Do you want to come? We need someone who specializes in working with LGBTQI plus kids. Do you want to come work with us? And I was like, yeah, I do. And you know who it was who called me? It was the person who taught that first yoga class. She had moved, and this was our point of reconnection. Amazing connection. She also shares the same first name as the person who I broke up with that started this all. Right. So I started working at Charlie Health. Eventually it became a full-time gig. I got tenure at TCU, told him to kick rocks, left academia, do this full-time now. Over 1,000 days sober, very happily queer, right? And back together in a new way with that person I broke up with. Because you see, what happened was we needed to split because we were both pretending to be cisgender straight people. It was our queer selves that fell in love, but neither of us had met them yet. We each had our own awakening caused by that breakup. And when we came back together, Kara mentioned these different means of attraction. It's not all sexual. Now we have a non-romantic, non-sexual, because I'm an asexual, aromantic person. We have what's called a queer platonic relationship. And it's beautiful, all right? Now I've learned a lot by having these experiences, because one of the things I think is really important when you're working with LGBTQI plus youth is that they can identify with you and that you can identify with them. Lived experience is an important thing. There's this old school therapy idea of like being a blank slate. None of you shows up in the therapy room. Nonsense. I reject that completely, right? Because for some of us, we can't just mute our identities. And if we try to, that's being inauthentic. So I want to share with you two things that I've learned that I now bring into my work working with these kiddos, right? And one is about authenticity. There's this question, when we look at those numbers that Kara shared, we see that jump with Gen Z. Suddenly it's like 1/5 of the population is LGBTQI plus. How did that happen? Is this trendy? Is a question I get all the time. Is this hip? Is this something the kids are doing for social capital? Well, let me tell you, I'm not just queer, I'm left-handed, right? I want to share a graphic with you. As soon as I can find my graphic. I got a lot of windows open. Let's talk not about queerness. I want to talk about left-handedness. Right, so this is a graph of the rate of left-handedness among Americans by the year of birth. So you look around 1905, and just about 3% of the population was left-handed. But then it starts to increase gradually until it plateaus off at around 12% in and around 1960. Right. That's interesting. What's going on there? That's a lot like those numbers we saw earlier with queer identity. You can imagine being someone around 1920, 1930, being like, this left-handed thing, this is just a trend. This is what the kids are doing these days, experimenting with their handedness, right? But we know better than that. We know that what happened was we stopped slapping left-handed kids on the wrist with rulers and then forcing them through corrective action to write with their right hand. It's not that more people were left-handed. It's that we started letting people who were left-handed be left-handed. That 12% was the number all along. It's just we were suppressing it by not allowing it. So are all the problems of left-handedness solved? Now that left-handed people can get married, is the fight over? No, it's not, because anti-left-handed bias is baked into our language. Do y'all know that the word ambidextrous means having two right hands? Do y'all know that the word sinister means left-handed? Right? Even our language is intrinsically biased against the left-handed. Okay, maybe you're not too worried about that, but let me tell you about my experience as a lefty moving through the world. When I write with a pen or pencil, I get graphite or ink all over this part of my hand. It's annoying. When I write on a chalkboard, I get covered in chalk. My right-handed friends don't have to deal with that. A classroom. Growing up, there was a legally mandated number of left-handed desks that were required to be in every classroom. No school that I ever went to lived up to that. There were no left-handed desks, or if there were, there was like one, right? But like, that's not enough for 12% of the kids, right? So I would always have to sit awkwardly. I didn't know what to do with this arm while I was in the left-handed or in the right-handed desk. The worst is the swipey thing at the grocery store. Right? That's a place for right-handed people. And when I got all my stuff, it's really awkward to try to swipe the card or sign the thing. As a left-handed person, I notice these things. If you're left-handed, you notice them too. But if you're right-handed, you might not notice them at all. Why? Because the world is designed for you. Because you're a right-handed person living in a right-handed world. You don't call it the right-handed world. You just call it the world. I'm a left-handed person, so I'm very aware that I live in a right-handed world. Now, I could explain all the analogies, but I feel like that might be a little insulting. I think the parallels are very, very clear here, right? I don't think this is a trend. I think what we're seeing is a natural development. We're seeing kiddos being who they would be. Those lower numbers among boomers would be just as high if, like, we would see many, many more non-binary and gender non-conforming, gender expansive boomers if they had this language back then. And let's also call a spade a spade. That language was around. It's been around for a long, long time. This is not some new flash in the pan gender ideology. When we look across culture and history, gender diversity was the norm. It's the strict rigid binary that's kind of a newer invention. Really a colonialist invention, right? I mean, we look at the Sekhet from ancient Egypt. We look at the Hijra in India, third gender legally recognized since the 1700s. We look at the 6 genders of classical Judaism, 4 of which by today's standards would be called non-binary. Right? The classics never go out of style, and now gender expansiveness is coming back. Right? And we stopped slapping kids on the wrist. So it's predictable that we would see those numbers jump up. But in my last minute and 32 seconds, I got a timer right here. I'm going to wrap it up with the second lesson I learned. So the sub theme of this is, it's about raising LGBTQIA plus kids and fostering resilience. And I just want to share a thought on that word resilience. As we advance and as we get more rights, we get more and more pushback. Like I said, I'm leaving my state of Texas because I don't feel safe here anymore, right? I don't have a choice but to be resilient. Resilience is not optional. Resilience is a survival mechanism. Resilience and the emotional energy that goes into it is a tax on continued existence. Sometimes when I get praised for being resilient, it stings because it's like, it's really a privilege to get to be tired and to get to rest, right? I think fostering resilience is wonderful. But one of the things that I don't have children of my own, but one of the things I want for all the kids that I work with is for them to have a space where they can put the resilience aside and where they can take a couple moments to just be weak, be scared, to feel those emotions, because those emotions are real. And if we don't recognize them, they linger. Right? So in my last 5 seconds, I'm just going to take a deep breath and then yield the space. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. There's my timer.
Thank you so much, Lee. I really value your comments on resiliency as well. I know I saw some other head nods too. So I'm sure that everyone is in agreement there. And I think that Kate, you are next. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kim, for having me, and Kara, thank you so much for being here, and you presented that info amazingly. And Lee, oh my God, loved it, nailed it. So excited that I finally got to meet you and to hear you share that. It's beautiful. Again, my name is Kate Roberts. Like Kara said, I'm a therapist. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. I got sober at the age of 18. So I was a pretty young kid. I was a senior in high school. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a queer lesbian. I'm legally married to a woman who's the love of my life. And I'm just really happy to be here talking about this. And what Lee was just talking about is exactly what I wanted to start with, is this word resilience. You know, and I think in our society, it kind of yields this definition of being tough, right? You got to bounce back, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that whole toxic message about what resilience truly is. And there have been so many times I'm like, I don't want to be, no, thank you, not today. And I encourage everybody else to throw it away. Who needs it right now? You know? I have this workbook that's fairly popular, and I've used some of the exercises before with clients, and it's called the Queer and Trans Resiliency Workbook. And there's a couple of things in there that are really awesome, but I love the way that the author defines resilience, and they call it ordinary magic. And anytime I heard the word magic, I like hop on that, because I feel truly that queer people have a magical ability. Neurodivergent people have a magical ability, right? So this ordinary magic, right? And so when I work with clients, I talk a lot about that, right? Of how can we own and harness your magic, right? How can we create ways that you kind of have this army, right? This inner empowerment is what it's about, to be able to protect yourself. And it sucks that we have to protect ourselves, but I like to turn it as radical empowerment, you know? And with kiddos, every kid, right, has to kind of learn this idea of resiliency. But with queer and trans kids, there's this added layer to it. And what caregivers and community members and family members and parents can do is help these kiddos harness and hone that ordinary magic, right? Supporting them in their journey of what that means for them. And in a little bit, I'll talk about like potential ways to do that, ways that I've found that have worked. I myself am not a parent, but I have a nibbling. And we use the word nibbling because we don't use niece or nephew. So she uses she, they pronouns. She's pansexual. She's non-binary. They're 11. And I had one of the best experiences with them a few weeks ago. We got to go to her first Pride in Phoenixville. And I got to be a part of taking them to that. And I was so curious, like how she was going to react, what it was going to be all about. I mean, COVID really has made big crowds really tough, right? And sensory issues, it makes it hard. But we went and I just sort of watched, right? I kind of followed behind her a few steps back and sort of watched, and a little shy, right? A little overwhelmed. And then I saw this group of kids walking down, probably her age, maybe a little bit older. And they had their big non-binary flags tied around their neck as capes, and their pan flags tied around their necks as capes. And they had rainbow socks on and glitter and stickers everywhere. And I saw her see this and she totally lit up, right? And I, of course, am crying hysterically, like happy tears, right? But it was such a cool moment to witness that. And then she's running around getting stickers, making friends. I saw one of their favorite TikTokers, like totally floored, like total celebrity shock when they saw them, and it was amazing. But to see her just be totally free, right? So we asked after, like, hey, what did you think? And she said, well, you know what? I thought it was so cool that I was in a place where everybody was just like me. Kids, grown-ups, everyone looked like me. Everyone acted like me. She's like, I never had that before. And I thought, damn, that's cool, right? Here's one of these core memories that's going to help harness and hone and develop that queer resiliency, that inner magic. And so I feel so lucky that I got to be a part of that. And I got to have the conversations with her. And so that was like a really cool moment for me growing up. A little bit about my story. You know, I had no idea back in the 90s, early 2000s, that I didn't know what queer meant. I didn't really know what a lesbian was. You know, I didn't know anything other than don't be that, right? That was the message I was continuously receiving. This is not an option for you. Don't even try. So I made it my job. And this is stuff I didn't figure out until I did therapy as an adult, right? But I made it my job to really be sure that I pay attention to the way that I should sit in a chair. Sit in a chair, almost said that weird. Cross my legs, right? I paid attention to the way that I walked, right? The kinds of things that I wore, the way that my hair was. I always had a boyfriend. And always felt extremely anxious. I always say that I had anxious straight out of the womb, you know, but nothing ever felt right. Just like what Lee was talking about. I love that analogy with the shoes. That was my life. Like, thank you for that. That's how it was, right? Pebbles in the shoes, glass shards in the shoes. And I just didn't understand. And I didn't have anybody to talk to about this. I felt so alone, right? And every single day growing up in the community I grew up in, I would get these little messages, sometimes really loud messages of like, this is wrong, this is bad, don't be this, right? And there was these little tiny paper cuts every single day, right? It's that death by 1,000 cuts. It's kind of based off this minority stress model, right? Kara was talking about. And eventually those cuts basically took my arm off. And I was in so much pain and struggling so much that I had to turn to something to help me. And that thing was alcohol. And that thing was like, woo, I have arrived. I am here. This is exactly what I need to be doing 24/7. Because I didn't care about the way that I sat in a chair. I wasn't paying attention to my hair. I didn't care how I walked, how I spoke. None of that mattered. I was just free in my mind, right? But it took me down really quickly. You know, that was at age 14. I was in treatment by age 17. It took a very short amount of time, but for me, it was forever, you know. At 17, I got the opportunity to get sober. I went away to treatment and I started to learn things about myself, and things started to bubble up. And I wasn't ready though. I wasn't ready to look at my gender. I was not ready to look at my sexuality. I kept pushing it away. I got out of treatment and I went back to my old best friend, alcohol, because I just didn't know how to live as myself, because I didn't know being me was amazing. I didn't know that yet, right? So eventually I stepped back into my recovery world, and I basically ran to California, and a group of queer people my age that were in recovery scooped me up, and they created this safety bubble, right? They let me be exactly who I was. They helped me stay sober and helped me figure out who I was, which changed day to day, and it still does, right? But they let me be me, and they created the thing that I needed the most, which was safety and validation and normalizing who I am, they listened to me, they heard me. And I felt like I was with an army with them. Like I felt protected. And they taught me how to do that for myself too, right? They taught me how to, again, harness that ordinary magic that I had. So, excuse me. So I stayed in California for 12 years. And then after a while, I got ready to come back to the East Coast. I wanted to be around my family and my wife's family. And so we came back here. And I've slowly, we moved in the middle of the pandemic. We moved in June of 2020. So I was totally isolated here, right? But slowly but surely started to build that community here. And I'm still working on that. But one thing I did mention, I'm going to go back a second. While I was truly stepping into who I was, right? And feeling good about myself, my family is back in Pennsylvania. My parents, they're learning, they're educating themselves. They're going to PFLAG. They got support for themselves. They started attending Pride events. They started doing all these things to best support me so that when I did go home, I got to leave my safe Southern California bubble and go into a safety net here. And I felt seen and I felt heard, which was all I ever wanted from my family, was to feel seen and heard. And I did, and I still do. My parents are amazing. They go to Pride events and they carry those signs that say like free mom and dad hugs. And, my dad wears his hot pink, really tight shirt because I know he likes getting checked out. I hope he's on here and heard me say that. So it's amazing. And now I have my nibblings that I get to take to Pride, right? It's just like a family thing, and it's so normalized and it's so incredible. Now, Lee and Kara both touched on this. Yes, my nibblings get a chance to grow up in a world where they can be seen and heard a little bit more, right? There's also a dark side to this, right? The rate of suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts and mental health and substance use is as high as it's ever been. So what's happening here, right? It's extremely high. I think a lot of that, again, has to do with statistics and numbers and things like that. But how can we help our kiddos, right, stay away from this and move into this resiliency? How can we help them harness it, hone it as parents, as caregivers, right? Like what I said at the beginning. So a couple of things that I've found that have worked, at least, for my clients. I work mostly with adults, but we do this work regardless of age, doesn't matter. So listen, validate, and normalize, right? If a kiddo is saying, hey, these are my pronouns, awesome, great, use them, let's go get ice cream, right? This is my name, right? Ask them questions, right? Bring in stories from, books and things and read with them. Order them the pansexual flag so they can hang it in their bedroom, right? Just be a part of, right? Create an affirmative home, which is like super, super important. There's so much power in that. Support them in getting connected with other queer kiddos, right? Again, super important. Community. That was my biggest thing that helped me find my magic. Introducing them to media. There's so much media out there that I get overwhelmed with it. But my niece, I'm asking my niece some of her stuff, and anime is huge with the queer community, Dungeons and Dragons, anything like fantasy oriented and mythical. She's like, everybody's all about it. And she thinks I'm old, right? And the things that I like are like extremely outdated, which is fine. I agree with her. But, there's musicians and like Lil Nas X and YouTubers and TikTok. And it's just like this huge thing. Introduce them to the media that has good representation. Doing your own research, right? Getting support like you're doing here tonight, right? Learning some things, reach out, work with therapists, with parent support groups, understanding that you're going to make mistakes and that's okay, right? You make a mistake, you apologize without justification, and you move on and you do better next time, right? Last thing I'll say is advocating. advocating for your kids is a big deal. You know, they quite often, you're still their protector, their defender when they're younger. You know, they're the one that they're going to look to you to help them. So be that help, be that cheerleader, right? Advocate in schools if schools aren't an affirmative place for them. Advocate with extended family members if the extended family members aren't a safe place for them, right? Be in the community, be out, be loud, right? All of this, again, creates this queer magic and this empowerment inside these kids. And that's what they need. You know, at the end of the day, it just needs some love. And who better to give it than community, family, and friends, right? So I think, I might stop there. I should have set a timer too, but I feel like that's probably about good. So thanks.
That was pretty good for not having a full timer.
Nice.
Yes. And I do see we have a question about kind of communicating with school communities. So hopefully we'll address that a bit more in our Q&A session. But I'm going to turn it over to Joe Charette, and you can just go ahead, Dr. Joe.
You don't have to call me that here, Kara.
I know it's a habit.
I know it's, but it's wonderful to be here with you folks again, Kara and Kim. Thanks for having me, and I am so thrilled that I got to be here. I got some, some validation that I did not know I needed from hearing Kate and Lee's stories, and I'm trying not to get emotional over here, so thanks for that, folks. But I'm an easy crier. I will try not to do that though. So just to, I want to talk to you folks before I share a little bit about my experience. I think it's really important for me in the work that I do, and also in this conversation, to really situate myself in kind of where I'm coming from. So I'm Joe, my pronouns are he, him, and I identify as a queer person. And I say that very, very specifically. I did not say queer man, I said queer person. And I also do this fun thing where sometimes I tell people that I'm gay because that's easier for them to understand than me trying to explain what queer to them means, because queer is more than just about my sexual and affectional identity or who I see myself to be as a person. It's part of my clinical identity as a counselor. It's part of my educational identity. It's a political identity. It fits into all of these things. Or I should say all of those things kind of, fit into who I see myself to be. And again, sometimes I just get lazy and I don't feel like explaining myself to people. So it's just easier if all they know about me is that I have this enduring pattern of romantic and sexual attraction to men, and that's all they need to know about me, right? Which is true. It's just not the full picture. And the reason I say that is because what stood out to me in several of the things that the folks were sharing before me, and also that Kara was talking about in her intro, is this piece about definitions of identities. And for the folks in the room tonight, the one thing that I want to stress is you can get a lot of information on the internet. Kara knows I'm famous for telling people when they ask me questions that you can Google it. That's what it's there for. Don't make me do that queer labor. So, but I want to stress that the most important definition that you can understand about someone's identity is the one that they tell you themselves, right? Which is why I'm telling you mine, because that's what queer means to me. Queer is going to look different to every person who says that they're queer. It looks different to all of my clients. My non-binary clients all define their experience differently from each other. So do my trans clients. So do my clients who are queer women, right? And again, we're not always in the position to be able to ask people what their identity means. And if we're not in that position, you know what that means? That means that our identity or their identity is none of our business. And we have to be happy about that. And we do not have to understand a person's identity in order to give them dignity and respect in a safe space, right? Sure, it helps. I think it does as people. We just so desperately want to understand everything that's in front of us, right? But I would say that understanding comes after dignity. Dignity does not come from understanding, right? So we have to offer that to, I know we're talking about raising young folks tonight. We have to offer that dignity to those young folks, whether they're our children, whether they're the people in our spaces, whether they're our nibblings. I've got 13 of those, Kate. So it's a big. I've got 4 siblings, right? All my family does have children. So not me. I don't have any children. But we have to offer that dignity first if we really want to create a space where those people are going to feel understood, or they're willing to share what I've just shared with you, willing to share what I've just shared with you. You get what I'm saying, right? Where there's that willingness to share that personal experience, because there's something that's emerged both in my personal life as a queer person, but also my clinical research is all about what I call ambient trauma. And that's just the trauma of existing in a space where the world is not safe. And it's like ambient lighting or elevator music, where sometimes it's always there. Sometimes you notice it. Sometimes it really irritates you, especially if you're a person who has sensory issues, or if it's lighting, sometimes it's just not right. So sometimes it affects you more often than not. But the bottom line is it's always there, and it always has some kind of influence on you, because how many of you have gotten out of an elevator and 2 hours later you're humming the music that was happening in the elevator, right? And so it sticks with you. So something that has emerged from my research is that there's this the experience of queer people is just fraught with uncertainty, right? It's uncertainty if I don't know how that person is going to react to me just because of what they think about me, or because I don't fit their socialized understanding of what a man or woman is supposed to look like or supposed to be, or how I'm supposed to act. Kate, a lot of the things that you were talking about that you did when you were younger to make yourself seem straighter, I also did those things. I remember my dad told me one time that boys didn't wear jewelry, and then I didn't wear jewelry until I was 25. He's a lot better now, folks. I just want to preface that. He's become a great ally, and even a co-conspirator, I would say. But it's this uncertainty that we have to live with, of always, wondering what's going to happen next. And so I want to segue this into something that I wrote down when Lee was talking, and I don't remember, Lee, what exactly you were saying that made me think of this, but I'm always struck by this idea, none of us are born into this closet. It's usually things that we experience or that happen to us that build that closet around us. Or we figure out real quick that we can build that around ourselves to keep ourselves safe. And one of the biggest things that sticks out to me is that experience of uncertainty, because we don't know what people are going to say. We don't know what they're going to do. And sometimes those people are our parents. And sometimes that uncertainty comes from, which is what my parents did. It's not that they did anything bad. It's that they didn't do anything. And I don't blame, I'm nearly 30 years old, and a lot of therapy has taught me not to blame them. So, and I have a much better relationship with them now, right? But they didn't know what to do. I remember my mom said to me one time that she was like, having a gay kid didn't come in a parenting handbook. And I said, well, did anything else? And she said, no, but this is really not something I planned for. I considered a lot of other options before I ever thought I would have a gay kid. And she said, so I had to learn right along with you, right? But when I was younger, there were all kinds of people around me who were either saying negative things, or they were just not contradicting the negative things that people outside of our circles were saying. And so in the absence of any action, I'm thinking, and I've got some lovely religious trauma. So I grew up in a church community, and lots of people were saying things about what God thought of gay people. And I was like, nobody's contradicting this almighty deity. So I guess I'm just supposed to run with that, right? So I didn't know, well, I wasn't 100% sure what anybody thought. And for my own safety, I hid myself, right? Because that was the safest thing to do. Let everybody think I am who they think I am. And then maybe when I go to college, it'll all go away. See, this is how diluted the closet makes you. I was convinced that going to college would make me straight, I said that to someone recently and they were like, what? And I was like, right, it sounds crazy, because it is. But also it was that belief that allowed me, to get into my, my early college years, because I came out when I was 19, and I came out because I finally decided that there was a part of me that just couldn't stay hidden anymore, or I was gonna lose part of myself, right? I had slipped into a pretty deep depression. This was around the time I actually decided to become a therapist because of my own experience, but I had to get out, and I came screaming out of there to my friends, my parents. It took a little bit longer, but they weren't prepared. And part of that is, again, is not their fault. They just had no idea what they were supposed to do. But I spent years and years and years preparing for the absolute worst reaction possible. That way I was not unprepared, and that didn't happen. But I want to speak to you now too from a clinical perspective of I don't typically work with LGBTQIA plus kids, but I work with a lot of queer kids who turned into queer adults, right? And the thing that rings true for me is that we build lots of defenses as young folks that we think we're going to need, and even if we don't need them, they take sometimes twice as long to break down, right? And so I'm always trying to imagine for myself, what would a world look like where I wouldn't have had to build so many defenses that I wouldn't spend my 20s trying to get rid of, so that it would affect, my romantic partnerships, my relationship with my family, my relationship with myself, and my mental health. I'm not a person in recovery, but I am a substance use counselor. I used to work directly in co-occurring treatment with mental health and substance use, but now I also work with people with long-term recovery and family members of people who are in active addiction or in recovery. And so I see how that affects people, and how substance use becomes an easy coping skill. And I'll tell you from my experience, it's really good at what you want it to do, right? But at the expense of a lot of other things. And so I always start to wonder, again, what would this world look like if that didn't have to be the option? If young folks didn't have to turn to that, or if we didn't have to have such tumultuous mental health journeys that we had the need to spend, again, I don't want to work. I don't want to be without a job. But if we didn't have to spend so much time, and I love my therapist, I love all my clients, but I would like for all of them to not need me one day, right? Not that they need me now. I'm just kind of along the way, right? So I want to speak a little bit more to some things that again stuck out to me about what the other panelists were saying, and I think the best thing that you can do to support queer and trans kids is just believe them. It is that simple. Kara will know this is something I stress in class all the time. It's like, if you don't, and I don't even care if you understand, even if you have questions, just believe your child when they come to you with this type of experience, right? And then get curious, ask questions in a non-judgmental way, do your own research if you need to, but I can tell you that the most harm that has ever been done to me by people in my personal life was that they didn't believe what I was telling them about my experience, because then what you imply is I can't accurately interpret my experience. And because of all of the stuff that I'm absorbing from the environment that's negative about queer and trans people, I already think enough things about myself that are negative or that I'm crazy. And so all I need, or I should say the last thing I need, is for someone who I'm going to, that I trust, to also not believe me, because then I think, well, maybe all of those people are right. And I can tell you how I got there, because I spent the first 18 years of my life in that exact same process. So it's very easy for me to kind of slip back into there of thinking like, well, maybe I'm the person in the wrong. And maybe I don't, I've been in that space of maybe everybody would just be better off without me. And maybe life would be easier if I didn't have to deal with all of this. Fortunately, I had a wonderful family of choice in college, and my family came around with lots of understanding, and me making them my little education project and kind of forcing them to investigate the things that they needed to know. about me in order to support me. And I had a conversation with my parents just a couple of weeks ago that I can't believe. You know, I'm almost 30 and I still need this from my parents, because again, I was a queer kid who became a queer adult. And before I share this, the other thing that stands out to me too is when queer folks have these experiences, our adolescence gets delayed. So then we get the fun job of being a teenager in our 20s while we're also trying to be adults. And so honestly, it makes us very resilient, which I'll also touch on. But is it traumatizing? Yes. So I had this conversation with my parents the other day, or a couple weeks ago, like I said, and I have concerns about an aunt of mine who I know. I don't think that she views my identity negatively. I think she loves me, but I think that she's a, you know, love the sinner and hate the sin kind of person, which is super great as a person with religious trauma, right? So I was saying to my parents, you know, I don't know what to do, because if I know the truth, I think it'll change my relationship with her. And my dad looked at me and he said, you know that it would change my relationship with her too? And I said, really? And he said, yeah, you don't think I would stick up for you? I said, it's not that I didn't think that, it's just that I don't know. I didn't know that I had an advocate here. And my mom goes, yeah, by the way, me too. That would be a huge problem for me. So being that person. Now, I'm not saying the key to supporting your queer kids is alienate your family who doesn't agree with them. That's not the message here. The message is here, show up for those kids, right? Show up in the places that they feel like they can't, in the places where they don't feel safe, in the places where they feel like they have to use that resilience that Kate and Lee were talking so beautifully about. And I think I want to leave you with an additional piece about resilience, right? Is that I'm so tired of being resilient. I'm so tired. I love, in my clinical work with my queer and trans clients, we capitalize on resilience, because the way that I look at it is if you're sitting in front of me, I know you have some resilience because we've talked about everything that you've lived through. So we can use that, but also it's my responsibility as an advocate and as a counselor to also make sure that I'm doing the work to eliminate the structures that cause you to have to be resilient in the first place. And so I'll leave you with this. There's this advocate and speaker that I like. They're a non-binary person. Their name is Alok. And they said that it's easier to ask us to be resilient than to remove the structures that cause us to be resilient in the first place, right? And so I want to leave you with that I think everything that I've said is the best thing you can do, right? Another one of the best things that you can do to support queer and trans kids is to, again, do what's in your power as a parent, as a teacher, as a family member, as a friend, to eliminate those things that cause these kids to have to be resilient. And to the question that was asked earlier about the school, to create those spaces where people don't have to be resilient. This is what I teach as a counselor educator, this is what I teach my students about therapy spaces when they ask me, like, what can we really do? And I said, you can create this space where people don't have to be resilient, even if it's only an hour a week, that's okay. But you better make darn sure that the space that you're creating is a space where people don't have to use those kinds of mechanisms, right? Where they can truly be authentic and be validated for their lived experience, and hopefully build some tools along the way. So I think that's all I have to say. That was a marathon. I apologize if I talked too fast for anything. I'll happily repeat anything later.
That was great. Thank you so much. We have just one follow-up question. Can you speak just on how being queer delays adolescence, and just give maybe a few moments, just kind of explain what you meant by that?
Sure. And Kate and Lee, if you have any additional thoughts, I saw you both nodding your heads. Please jump in on this one. You know, so in my work, it comes from having not been it comes from not having been out in my teenage years. So not only was I was concealing my identity completely, so I just wasn't myself then. But a lot of it came from, I didn't get to date when I was a teenager, so I didn't get to have teenage heartbreak. I didn't get to have a first love. I had a lot of girlfriends for someone who was trying to make their queerness go away. And that caused a lot of people some confusion. Lovely questions I had to address in my early 20s, right? So all of that personal development that we see that teenagers get to have, that adolescents get to have in those adolescent years, queer people, myself, many of my clients didn't get to have those kinds of things because we were too busy hiding ourselves and trying to manage our identity. So honestly, our development gets delayed. And I mean like our development as a person, not necessarily like our physical development, but sometimes our mental development, our cognitive development, our ability to self-regulate, those really helpful tools that later down the road we don't have, so we just become resilient, right? That's how it feels to me. And Lee, I know you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, first, I want to thank you both for everything that you've said. Like, I just want to go out for coffee after this and continue talking about all of these things, because there's so much overlap in these stories we're telling. On the adolescence point, I feel a lot of grief over my childhood because, I'm almost a 40-year-old woman. I've never gotten to be a little girl, because when I was a little girl, no one told me that's what I was. So I've had to do a lot of inner child work. And that work can be really difficult. And, go back and feed this child who never got to exist. Because, we talked about hitting people in the wrists with rulers, and we talked about being really conscious of our presentation. When I was growing up, I was not allowed to look at my nails this way. I had to look at them this way, because this was the girl way and this is the boy way. And I had the boy way enforced on me. Right. So I was very, very rigid. I missed out on a lot. I look at some of my other friends who are women, and I see the experiences that they got to have as kids. I just didn't get them. So there's a lot of grief and a lot of recreating of this adolescence during very intentional inner child work. There's also, being a trans person, adolescence comes with puberty. Puberty was hard for me, if I may share that, because sometimes when we're looking at gender affirming care and things like puberty blockers or hormone therapy, we worry about what happens if you regret it. Well, either way, our bodies are on conveyor belts of irreversible change. And one question we want to ask is, what happens if you regret not doing it? I absolutely regret the fact that I didn't get that opportunity. My body developed in ways that have caused me serious dysphoria. So, here I was in my mid-30s starting hormone therapy, and hormone therapy induces quite literally a second puberty. So I'm actually getting, not to equate puberty with adolescence, but there's a sense in which I am, going through puberty again. And puberty once is rough enough. Puberty again, when you're also trying to be an almost 40-year-old adult, is annoying. I wish I could have only had to do it once, but I just didn't have access to the proper care.
Kara, I thought of something else. I always have that.
I
know. So Lee, the other thing that stuck out to me about what you said too is this idea of reparenting especially in your 20s, and it can happen at any age for anybody, but I think for queer people in my clinical experience, it happens in the 20s and 30s. And how it looks for me is that it didn't matter what my parents were going to try to teach me about being a teenager. I was never going to let them see the real me. So everything that they were teaching was to somebody who didn't really exist. And so I didn't take any of those lessons into my early adulthood with me, and had to relearn them all myself with the help of just visibility from other queer people, friends, elders, and from therapy. And so that's really what that delay looks like to me. And the other thing too, Lee, you mentioned about what if people regret the decision to either have surgery or to do HRT. People regret things all the time. Why do we over-pathologize this particular regret, even if someone regretted it, right? And for anybody, out there who's listening, you know what? The percentage of people who regret these decisions is literally 1%. It's literally 1%. So that argument, again, it's just it's a defense, right?
Yeah, the rate of regret for knee surgery is higher than the rate of regret for transition.
Right. Yeah. So why do we make this one so bad? Why do we take away trans people's autonomy? I mean, I know the answer, but I'm still frustrated by that. That's why I'm posing the question.
Thank you so much. And I just want to kind of shift to some questions that are coming in, and also some questions that were previously asked. All three of you talked about, just showing up with love and advocacy, and the, pushing that you should be your child's advocate. We have two questions. The first is, how do I help my non-binary child navigate relatives that love them very much, but don't understand about validating who they are? And we also had a previous question about how do I show my queer child that I am a safe parent when the other parent is not? So, don't know who wants to tackle that one first.
I have some things I can say on that. So there was recent research that came out that, this was research specifically on suicidality, but I speculate that it would generalize to other sorts of struggles as well. That each context that a child feels affirmed in contributes to this lessening of these struggles. It doesn't need to be all or nothing, but if they have one context, whether it be at home or in the therapist's office or at school or amongst their friends, each context is a cumulative decrease in these in suicidality, and by speculation that would extend to depression, probably drug use, all of these things, right? So what we can do is we can, instead of always focusing on what we're not doing yet, take some real comfort in what we are doing. If we're providing our child one affirming environment, that's huge. Research suggests that having just one affirming adult in a child's life can reduce suicidality by up to 40%. What a gift if you get to be that one affirming adult. Even better if you've got two, right? So yeah, so that was one answer. Can you repeat the question, Kara? Because I had a thought for the other one too, but I forget what it was.
Yes, the first one was how to deal with relatives that don't understand how to affirm a non-binary kiddo's identity.
Yes. Here's what I tell, because I work with a lot of clients who experience exactly that. What I like to tell them is this little reframe. It's like, look, your identity is valid. You are the authority of your identity. Someone can try to tell you that you're not who you are, but they don't succeed in invalidating you. They're trying, but you're valid, which means that their attempt to invalidate you is doomed to fail. They can try and they can be wrong. Someone comes at me and says, you're not a woman. I'm like, I'm sorry, honey. That sounds like a you problem. You're just mistaken. You want to say the moon is made of cheese too? Grass is pink? Cool. You can go over there and be wrong all you want. I know who I am. Your invalidation attempt failed because, sorry. Right? But it's very important that we acknowledge, along with that reframe, that, yeah, it still stings. Invalidation attempts can still hurt. And giving folks permission to acknowledge that hurt can really be helpful. Not trying to brush it off and be like, oh, it doesn't hurt. You buck up, whatever. No, yeah, it hurts, but their attempt at invalidating you failed because you are valid.
Thank you. Kim, do you want to jump in here at all?
I was just going to say that, well, Kara sent me some really terrific resources. While you all were speaking, I was listening and at the same time uploading a lot of this stuff onto the webpage. So that follow-up page, which I'll share that link again in the chat, has a lot of really good guidance for family members. I think you'll find some really good help there. As Joe said, that you can Google a lot of this stuff. I mean, it's challenging, and I really respected what I heard one of the parents said in the chat about just the challenge of getting this onslaught of everybody coming out so almost simultaneously. It sounds like two of the children. And, I kind of fall back on a lot of what I learned about substance use. And there's those 3 A's: awareness, acceptance, and action. So you just had a lot of awareness. That's great that you are now aware that you can be there present. You can be present for them now that you're aware. The acceptance is crucial to, this is the reality. Thank goodness they had the space to come out and be open with you. That's a beautiful thing. But that acceptance, can take some time. Finding other parents through some of these support groups and like PFLAG and other ways can kind of help to get your head around it a little bit and just rethink what your preconceived notions of raising that child or those children were. But I don't know. I'd love to hear from this panel.
Do you have something to say, Joe? Oh, you're muted.
I said, of course I do. The thing that was coming to my mind about this is, I don't know these 2 kids that the question was about, but I think that the effort goes a long way, right? I really think it does. That, like, even when my parents make mistakes, the best thing the thing that I want from them is just like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Okay. And again, Kate, I think you said this earlier, you just do better the next time. There is absolutely no possible way that any of you, parent or otherwise, is going to know everything about your child's identity journey, right? Because you know who else doesn't know everything? Them. They're still figuring it out. And so you have some shared experience there. Now, again, you don't want to go about making that experience yours, also learning, because those processes are separate. But learning from them, learning from their corrections, being open to the things that you didn't know, and also giving yourself a little grace for the fact that you didn't know those things, right? I never expect my parents to fully understand the entirety of the queer community or the entirety of the large systems that impact me as one little queer person, right? But again, I want to come back to this believing point. When I say, hey, by the way, this affects me in this way, all I want you to do is believe it. Like, that's because that's why I'm telling you, because I want you to know how it affects me so that you don't say that thing, or that you don't do that thing, or that you have some kind of awareness. And so again, that I think that grace piece is so crucial. We're so quick to say, I'm a terrible parent, or I don't know what I'm doing. I will never get this. But even as a queer therapist who works with these communities, people's knowledge of themselves expands at a way faster rate than me as a clinician or a researcher will ever catch up with, and that's okay. So if you always feel like you're behind, just let everybody else is behind with you, and we're all having grace for each other.
Kate? Oh, you're muted.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, I wanted to add too, like with the grace period, apologizing and move on and do better, right? I also want to say that like almost like congratulations to you, because your kid is coming to you with this information, and how brave they are, right? And how awesome it is that you are a space for them, for your kids to come and tell you like, hey, this is who I am. So remember, like, yeah, having grace, and also kudos to you that like here you are showing up for them. And that goes a long way with that trust, right? Trust being like reliability, dependability, and consistency. So you're doing something good. So keep remembering that part too.
Yeah, I would love to piggyback on that comment and affirm to anyone out there who's worrying that they're the worst parent. 2 bits of information. 1, you showed up tonight for this. Y'all, not to be hard on my own parents, but my parents forgot I was trans. Right? over a year after I came out to them, they saw a photo and they called me up and they're like, you never told us. They forgot, right? That sticks with you, right? But you all showed up tonight. You showed up for yourself. You showed up for your kiddos. That's huge. That is an act of active allyship, right? And, with what Kate said about the congratulations, let's look at this phrase coming out, right? The origin of that phrase has nothing to do with closets. The origin of that phrase has to do with coastal cities, gay communities having versions of debutante balls where people would present themselves to queer society for the first time, right? They would come out just like a young woman would into society. It was only later that it starts to get this shameful connotation of the closet, right? And now there's this notion of coming out of the closet, which is scary. You're coming out and you're like, is it okay? And you're looking for someone else to approve of you. And a lot of times when you get a negative reaction, it's this reaction focused not on what you are, but on what you're not, right? You're not straight. You're not cisgender. You're not what I wanted you to be. Right? Let's throw that whole paradigm out, flip it around, and drop the coming out phrase and replace it with this notion of inviting in, right? We keep the power ourselves then. When we invite you in, we're giving you a gift. We trust you. We value your affirmation. We want you to see this complex, magical, somewhat scary part of our life to us sometimes, right? And if a child comes to you and invites you in, that means they trust you. That means they want your approval. They want your validation. Right? That's pretty amazing, right? So if you have children who are inviting you in and then you're coming here to this event, like, I don't know, I give you a gold star for that, right? Because I like to think of allyship as having 3 components, right? It's got to be effective, right? We got to do things that matter. It can't just be like changing your profile picture, right? So it's got to be effective. One time I was typing that and I misspelled it and I wrote affective because I get those words mixed up a lot. And then I was like, oh, wait, that's a thing too, though. Affective allyship, coming from the heart, doing that internal work. And then I was like, I got to make this into a snappy acronym. A and E, I'll put a C in the middle, loops back to that word we talked about earlier, curious. We ask, like, instead of like, oh, you're omnisexual, what does that mean? We'd be like, hey, you're omnisexual. What does that mean? Well, how did you come to that term? What does that mean for you? Right? So you say you're not sure if you're omnisexual or pansexual. How do you understand the difference? You hear the tone there, that inviting, that curiosity, right? And then it's like allyship, ACE, affective, from the heart, curious, and effective. If we can do that, we're showing up. And, by showing up here, asking these kinds of vulnerable questions, you're embodying that. So I applaud you. I see in the chat, my affect sucks. It's a practice, right? It's a practice. When I teach yoga, there's this idea that if you're doing a pose, you got to do the full version of the pose. No. If you're on your mat intending to do the pose, even if you fall, that's part of the practice. You're doing the practice, right? And sometimes the practice in getting better, some days you suck, right? But it's all forward movement, and you got this. You'll get there. You're doing it right now.
Thank you so much, Lee. And just on the topic of parents that are coming here, really ready to learn, we had 2 questions that are kind of searching for some tips from our panelists. I'm going to throw them both out there. The first is, how can we support our child transitioning to a gender neutral name? How to make that, support them through that. And the second is, how do you find LGBTQIA treatment options that are actually queer friendly? So I don't know which one of those you want to tackle first.
All names are gender neutral names, right? My name, Wesley, is a girl's name because I'm a girl, right? All names are your names. We gender them conventionally, but we can break that, right? And for for care, there's different levels of care. I specialize in intensive outpatient therapy. If any of you all are looking for affirming intensive outpatient therapy, which is kind of a step between this like inpatient experience and the once a week therapist visit, if you're looking for that level of care, shoot me an email and we can talk, and I can help you out with that.
I want to piggyback off what Lee said. The only effective way that I don't like this, but this is the only effective way that I have found to refer people to care is I'm like, just email me. I will dig into, because I know what to look for. So I'll dig in and happily provide some recommendations. Or queer people, especially queer healthcare providers, we all have networks. We know somebody. We know somebody who knows somebody who knows a queer affirming provider in this place.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like we all have this web, right? And so, yeah, reaching out and will help find care. But there are quite a few that are residential, and then a couple of IOPs that I know that I think Kim is going to put as resources on that page. But yeah, I'm sure any of us can email us too. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Kim, do you have any last thoughts, questions, anything from the chat that you're seeing come in? This has been
lots of beautiful remarks and thank yous and all of that. This is an absolute rock star panel. I cannot thank you all enough. This has been amazing. And I agree, we could go on forever and have lots of coffee talk after this, I'm sure. But folks, please just stay connected and let us know if we can be of any help to any of you. Please take the survey at the end. Getting lots of thank yous. So yeah, guys, you're amazing. Kara, beautiful job. Thank you for taking the wheel tonight. Appreciate it. But really, guys, thanks so very, very much for being with us. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. All right, that's
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.